Welcome, Margaret and fellows.
Good evening. Welcome, bienvenidos, friends of the Hispanic Society, to Las Tertulias de Arte Hispano. Before we begin, I would like to thank our members, especially those of you who are new to the Hispanic Society and are watching this series for the first time. We continue these conversations on the first Tuesday of each month at 6 p.m. If you're not a member, please do consider joining by going onto our website at hispanicsociety.org and search for membership under support. I also would like to offer a really sincere thank you to the Culpeper Art and Culture Program of the Rockefeller Brother Fund for supporting this fellowship with additional funds from the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute, as well as Hubert and Muriel Goldsmith. The idea of this fellowship first began before the pandemic, actually, with Ben Rodriguez Cueñas, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund Program Director for Culpeper Arts and Culture, and we are so excited to not only see the program come to fruition, but also with such great success. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming our 4 curatorial and conservation research fellows who have been working with us over the past year. I'll begin by asking each of them to share what brought them to the fellowship and what they have been working on at the Hispanic Society this year. We will then have an informal conversation about their experience. Before I introduce our fellows, I just want to mention that their bios are listed in the email that you have received, but I will just very briefly introduce them and ask them to sort of do a little wave so we know who they are. First, we have Anya Andreeva, who has been focusing on textile conservation. We have Amanda Dorval, who has been working in our Department of Rare Books and Manuscripts. We have Orlando Hernández-Ying, who has been focusing on works on paper, and that's drawings as well as watercolor. And Alexandra Rodriguez-Jack, who has been working on decorative arts and iconography. So I'm going to now ask Anya to please get us started. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm a textile conservator, and I came to the museum to explore the Iberian and Hispanic textiles. Back in grad school, I was working and researching several textiles on the subject and found research wanting. So I really wanted to explore the collection here. I heard of the collection, but had never seen it. So when I came, I began working with Hélène Fontoura-Marzin, who is the head of conservation department here. And we really dug into the textile collection. My first and foremost area of research became mantones de Manila, which are the beautiful silk embroidered shawls. We were studying them, doing examinations, some basic conservation, and then also continued into exploring the rest of the collection and found some amazing objects that really have not been exhibited yet. So in this way, really the idea of rehousing and kind of re-examination of a whole collection came to be, and we discussed looking at different objects, categorizing them, writing more condition reports, and that's what we're still in process of doing. So I do have some slides, I believe. Laura, yes, so this is just quickly one of the Manton de Manila. You can see the details on the right. Next. This is just an example of examination, looking at all the components and the structure of each object. Next. This is another manton that has ivory faces that many people have heard of. Next. This was an example of looking at the life of an object before it became a museum piece. So here, looking at the potential use of the shawl. Next one, thank you. And this is an example of the rehousing project. So taking objects from the flat cabinets and rehousing them, giving them individual support and boxes. And that is it. Thank you. And now I pass it off to Amanda.
Thank you, Anya. That was great. So Laura, we could just go to the next slide, please. So during my fellowship, my research involved a close examination of the library's really impressive cookbook collection in an exploration of the influences of the Middle East and North Africa in Spanish and Latin American cooking, particularly within pastry arts. As I conducted my research, I noticed some of the ingredients that best represent this cross-cultural influence are like cinnamon, sugar, almonds, cloves, dates, figs. There are so many other ingredients that are used in sweet dishes and savory dishes as well. As I conducted my research, I realized my goal wasn't to insinuate that there's like a direct A to B correlation between Middle Eastern food and Spanish and Latin American food, or even between like Arabic cookbooks and Spanish language cookbooks. But rather, I guess as I was developing my research paper, I ended up writing a paper on this, was to sort of explore how this specific instance of cross-cultural food influences kind of is part of a larger discussion about how the effects of the 800-year rule of the Islamic reign in Spain has endured within Spanish and Latin American cuisines. And this, again, as a part of a larger picture of the intercultural and interracial exchange that resulted from colonialism. So we can actually, before we go to the next slide, just briefly about these pictures here. There are so many cookbooks in the collection from all over Latin America, but I focused on books from the early modern period in Spain, as well as cookbooks from Mexico and from Puerto Rico. And in this slide, you can kind of see three of my favorites that I researched for this project. We can go to the next slide now, please. So in addition to my personal research, I also had the pleasure of helping out with tasks directly related to the department. Again, I worked in the Department of Manuscripts and Rare Books under Vanessa Pintado, who's the assistant curator of Rare Books, and also under Dr. John O'Neill, which was great. And one of the main tasks that I did over a lot during my fellowship was library cataloging and book description. And I don't think I cataloged this book in particular, but I used this one as an example because the physical characteristics of the book are very similar to some of the other books that I cataloged. And all of these things that you see here, the gold border, even the red end papers, everything has a specific term. So it was really enlightening for me to learn how to properly describe books during my time at the Hispanic Society. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Orlando.
Hello, thank you again for that. It was a wonderful opportunity for me at the Hispanic Society of America, Museum and Library, because I have been in and out of the institutions as an intern, as a fellow, as a volunteer. So it was a wonderful opportunity to actually wrap up something that started a long time ago with the research on the watercolorist, the Peruvian watercolorist from the 19th century, Pancho Fierro. We know a lot about Pancho Fierro. We know he was a very popular character in the 19th century Lima, and everybody knew him. And then a lot of people from early Republican Peru were actually taking his images to create the new idea, the visual repertoire of what was considered later the national identity of Peru. So that is, in broad terms, what is known about Fierro. He's also known for the tapadas, exotic ladies that were actually the mantones de Manila that Anya was talking about earlier, as a means to actually keep their identity secret, and in that way protect their intimacy and their pudor, but at the same time it also allowed for many ladies from the society to get away with saying bad things, saying little coquettish things to travelers in the 19th century Lima. But what really caught my attention here, can we see the next slide, please? Is the emphasis that he had in Afro-Peruvian people in the 19th century. And here we have El Capeador Esteban Arredondo, that is portrayed by Pancho Fierro as a very wealthy and well-known Afro-Peruvian in the Plaza de Toros in the Acho in Lima. And he was a pretty like a hero, like what we consider today the sports idols of today. Esteban Arredondo probably was the same in 19th century Lima. And also another interesting aspect that was addressed during this time of this period, this last year of research, and connecting with the research that I started almost 20 years ago, when there were only a handful of books about Pancho Fierro, also under the direction of Dr. Marcus Burke, our emeritus curator of paintings and works on paper. We also traced that the works by Fierro also inspired engravings that were used later by books like the one that we see on the right by Manuel Fuentes, that were written in French, published in 1866, that published also engravings related to the images of Fierro of the same character. So we see that the influence of Fierro was beyond, creating these little watercolors that were used as postcards back in the day, but also influenced a lot of other printed and other sources on paper. And we see the next slide, please. And also, it's a little moved over here, but what we see also is a correlation between the works of Fierro and works that were later produced in China by the means of the trade that was done by the East India Company, the steam powered ships that were actually carrying commerce and trading between London, Lima, by extension Latin America, and also Asia. So now I turn it out to Alexandra to continue with our discussion.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra. Thank you, Orlando. I actually had the pleasure of working with Orlando quite regularly on some projects, which I'll go into in a little bit. You can go to the next slide. I'm not going to go too in depth with this because I did the Tertulia on the Estrado, but my primary research was the Estrado, and I had the opportunity also of working very closely with Dr. Margaret McQuaid, who so kindly introduced us. And basically, just to go over what the Estrado is, it was a room or an area within a larger room that was designed exclusively for female use. And the Estrado itself is characterized by this low wooden platform that would have been typically made of wood or cork, and then sort of layered with various thick rugs, velvet pillows, and then these would have been either locally produced in textile workshops or imported from the Near East. And there's a lot of written descriptions that sort of attest to the fact that these women would sit either reclining or cross-legged a la morisca, which is clearly a reference to the Estrado's origins in Islamic Spain. And here on the left, we see one of the earliest known depictions of the Estrado, which is from, I guess these are two miniatures from the Libro del Ajedrez, Dados y Tablas, or the Book of Chess, Dice, and Tables, which was published in Spain in the year 1238. And the book, which is actually in the Hispanic Society's collection, was written by King Alfonso X. And it is actually the first treatise on chess and board games published in Europe. But for our sake, it's a really important document of, these two women sitting on these cushions playing this game at the same time where you have the Islamic influence in Spain actively spreading throughout the peninsula. And on the right, we have a more recent early 18th century depiction of an Estrado from Lima, Peru. And the engraving dates to about 1711. And it is from a book from Amédée Francois Fraisier, who was the French envoy for King Louis XIV. And he traveled to Lima, Peru, and wrote this book that was sort of cataloging his journey. And he did these sort of scientific diagrams like the one you see here. So it has kind of a sparse methodical quality to it, but you can sort of see the key components of the Estrado and gives you kind of some insight into the different objects that you would have seen at that time. You can go to the next slide. And here we have two beautiful objects that are in the very impressive collection of decorative arts here at the Hispanic Society. And as one of my favorite sources of information on the Estrado, the French Countess d'Aulnoy, she observed in the early 18th century that the Estrado essentially had the dual purpose of ladies' reception room and a curiosity cabinet. And both of these pieces really embody four key elements, which I would say uniquely define the visual culture of the Estrado, which is number one, cross-cultural contact between Asia, Americas, and Europe. And number two, the significance of display and collecting practices, especially, of objects commissioned by women. Number 3, the use of luxury materials. And then lastly, number 4, small scale versions of contemporary furniture styles. So for instance, on the left, this object is basically 4 feet high, and it's not necessarily known whether that object would have been in the estrado, but there are mentions of objects from Goa. So that's the Indo-Portuguese colony that would have been, or territory that would have been a source for a lot of the decorative arts that would have been transported over to Europe. And on the right, we have a hot water kettle in the shape of a lion, and you very frequently see these zoomorphic silver kettles. Again, we're talking about precious materials. This is made in silver. It's from the Viceroyalty of Peru, where you had the mines of Potosi. And so there were a staggering amount of estrado pieces that were made out of silver. So you can imagine sort of the wealth that you would have had in these spaces. And it sort of relates to the previous engraving I showed before from 18th century Lima. And you have also sort of these zoomorphic vessels that have been used to heat the water to drink mate. And then sort of the parallel in the Viceroyalty of New Spain would have been consuming chocolate. And actually, Margaret has a really good tertulia on the history of chocolate consumption in Spain and the Americas and the wares that they used to consume those, which is also very strongly correlated to the estrado. In case you're interested, you can go to the next slide. And just to talk about some other projects that I did during my fellowship, I had the privilege of working very closely with Dr. Burke and Orlando on the exhibition American Travelers, which is currently on view until October 16th. And I mean, we were involved from start to finish in this project, which was really exciting. And Dr. Burke entrusted me in designing the catalog for the exhibition, which was also a really great learning experience since I had some background in graphic design. And it was just a huge group collaboration with Elen, who's the talented chief conservator at the museum, Katya, the registrar, Jose, who literally does everything, and the designer, Steven. So again, like I felt like many people wear many hats at the museum, and this fellowship was a great way to sort of just juggle between these roles and see how truly the museum world is such a collaborative process. And then you can go to the next slide. And then lastly, one of the objects that I did research for that isn't necessarily related to my direct research was for the upcoming show, Spain and the Hispanic World at the Royal Academy of London. And this piece was really fascinating. There wasn't really anything written about it, but it was made in the Jesuit missions of Chiquitos in what is now Bolivia. And it combines European motifs, indigenous, pre-Columbian indigenous motifs. And it's sort of just an example of the kind of depth that you can find from these decorative arts pieces that are sort of, put on the back burner in comparison to traditional fine arts, but how they really do embody, as Orlando says, the history of the world in a single object. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Excellent. Thank you all. That's terrific. And just for our audience, each of our fellows also did tertulia. So for additional information, I encourage you to check out their tertulias where they go more into depth of their research. I have a few questions. And the first one first of all, I love the fact that each of you worked on such different areas. And I would love for you to share a moment when you discovered something new. I mean, did you have during your time in the Hispanics, did you have like a aha moment where you kind of made a discovery? Who'd like to start? Orlando, go for it.
I'd like to start, yes. One of the most amazing things that happened was that I could trace the route for the Cambridge, which was the steamboat that was coming from London to Lima to Penang and Calgary in Asia, that probably a ship, the Cambridge itself, or a very similar ship from the East India Company was doing also the trade of taking Pancho Fierro's work to China to later be reproduced in lithographs. And that was like finding that that route, that because all those routes are now digitized, it facilitates a lot of research that otherwise in the years before would have been would have taken a long time. So that was a really like key moment where I was like, wow, this is that the technology and everything coming together, and the international impact of Fierro's work was really something that I feel that was that key moment during my fellowship.
That's super cool. That's great. Who else wants to go next? Anya, go for it.
Well, for me, it was more of an important finding, really, since I kept digging into the textile collection and found this amazing object that was listed as, well, actually didn't have a provenance, and it was considered as a valance. When we retrieved it from the drawer and started examining it, turns out that most likely it's a headboard. And there's a picture, actually, Laura, if you don't mind bringing that up. There you go. So this was really, really interesting find. There isn't really a lot of research or any, for that matter, so I'm still putting together the information. It was very exciting because of all the elements that comprises, starting with the textile, the embroidery, the appliques, and there's a ton of information to pursue in scientific research, which I am hoping to do. So it was a true wow. Then also there was a hilo pegado. I think we do have that photograph also, Laura, the hilo pegado. If it's not there anyway, it's a very rare and also understudied piece that Noemi and I found, and Noemi got very excited about it also. So we're doing some research on it. So I realized that this collection has a lot of things, a lot of objects that really point to gaps in research in this field, which is very exciting, of course, and the museum has them. So that was
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Alex? Yeah, go.
Just to continue, a little shout out to Noemi Espinosa, who is our very talented and helpful textiles curator. I recently had a very exciting aha moment with her also when we were exploring the textile storage room. And I found a carpet from Anatolia, from the Ottoman Empire, this region, I guess, called Uşak, and they make a special carpet called the Star Uşaks. And I found an inventory from 1738 in Venezuela that mentions these carpets in the estrado. Wow. And that was just like mind blowing. And I've actually had that experience several times, like with the Goa cabinet. You have all of these objects from around the world that have been mentioned in relation to the estrado in period inventories in, across Latin America and in Spain. So it's pretty incredible that the breadth of the collection has these like individual objects that would have, and also I think it's a testament to how important the estrado must have been as well. And, how, as we're starting to discover women's spaces and sort of bring that into the light, this is like, and what Anya was saying about, realizing the gaps in the current discourse of, I guess, decorative arts or arts history. This institution is really key to filling those gaps for sure.
Excellent. Amanda.
Yeah, so I guess my biggest aha moment is kind of going all the way back towards the beginning of my fellowship when I actually figured out what it was I wanted to research. I didn't come into the fellowship with a really specific idea. I knew I wanted it to relate to books or print culture as a library student working in the library. And I also knew I wanted to try to figure out some way to tie in how the influences of the Middle East kind of played into that. But I had no idea what I was going to do. I think it took a few weeks, and I was kind of on the Hispanic Society website and came across a very small sampling of the cookbook collection online. So for anybody who's interested, there are some of the cookbooks digitized on the Hispanic Society website. And that was the aha moment. I don't know, it just felt right. And I did like quick Google searching about Middle Eastern influences in Spanish food and Latin American food, and came across a treasure trove of information about how the Middle East is really still to this day very representative within Spanish and Latin American cooking. And I guess taking it one step further to give a bit of a more specific example about another really cool finding for me, maybe not for people who are experts or in food history, but definitely for me, how like a lot of the ingredients that were introduced into Spain, and I guess by default later into Latin America by the Arabs and the Berbers in like during the period of the Islamic rule in Spain, like I mentioned, such as almonds, sugar, dates, things like that. Where was I going? How a lot of these ingredients made it into dishes, and I'm going back to the pastry arts, and some of these dishes were later kind of worked and perfected by people in the Catholic faith, like nuns were really well known for their sweets and confectionaries, and how a lot of these dishes furthermore were given names very Catholic names. I came across a cookie or type of cookie, I guess I'm using a more modern term, cookie, that is called rosquetes impregnados de espíritu de anís. So literally rosquetes impregnated by the spirit of anís. Anís was introduced into Spain by the Arabs, of course, and the language of the naming of that cookie is very representative of like the miraculous conception of the Virgin Mary. So very interesting for me. I don't know how much that is research. That could be a really interesting thing for me to kind of research further as I move forward with it. But how and why the namings of very Middle Eastern ingredients and sometimes even dishes were given Catholic names, and of course perfected by nuns and sometimes even like the friars and the monks. But very interesting.
That's so cool. I've never had one of those cookies.
I came across it in a Mexican cookbook.
One thing that I really enjoyed this year is seeing you all interact with one another, and also interacting with some of the artists who have been working with us from the Vilcek grant that we received. So I'm wondering if you can just share a bit about how you may have benefited from your interactions, and maybe it was with one another or maybe it was someone else, just to hear, how you learned from one another. It wasn't just a specific, you didn't just arrive and do your own research, but you really were able to learn and share with others. Go for it, Orlando.
Yes, well, I wanna say that one of the nicest things that also happened. I had interactions with all the fellows, but especially with Alexandra because we were in proximity, physical proximity. And then I also, after hearing her Tertulia, I realized that we have been looking at these objects, decorative objects, decorative arts that I'm aware of, but I'm not really have done all the research that you have performed into this field. So for me, they're all things that I'm acquainted with, but I haven't really thought about them in the way that Alexandra has, for example, studied them. And then I realized that we have been looking at them in very different spheres, like silverware, ivory from Goa, ceramics, like the ones that you have studied, Margaret. And then all of a sudden, all of these things come together in the Estrado. So we're, kind of like cooking and organizing an effort to see possibly we can come up with an exhibit later on. And I think that is wonderful because it's also pulling together from all the wealth of the collection from different types of holdings, textiles, because the Manila shawls also come into place, the textiles come into place, ceramics come into place, silverware, ivory, decorative objects from Asia. And just like, after you think that after being a PhD, you have like reached this level of knowledge, and there's always something new that someone with a fresh mind can, always share with you and make you see things in a different way. And I think that was wonderful. And also with Anya, like looking at in detail at all these fabulous textiles. We had a blast every time I passed by, when I saw her with a microscope or with her implements cleaning these things, and she would tell me like the knots and the reverse, and it was wonderful to see these things that were completely like another world. And absolutely with the cookbooks as well, you know, learning about all these things that were a completely different world. And also I must say that Vanessa was really instrumental into like opening the library for us. And she also shared with me some elements from Panama that I hadn't seen before and I wasn't aware of. And it also opened new venues for research. So thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Vanessa, for that.
Great. Who's next? Anya.
I'll tag on to Orlando, since that is one of the things I wanted to share. But actually, the first or one of the moments that I thought were wonderful was the serendipity with Alex's research, the books that she had on the estrado, I assume, and I had just discovered or uncovered this this object that I wasn't sure was a valance or headboard, and I was I felt that there was something else. It was a headboard, but I didn't have any research or proof or really any prior knowledge of it. And I was just looking at the books on interiors, and I opened one that was on her desk and started looking through pictures, and I saw a picture. There was a I don't remember if it was a bed, in a palace or somewhere, but it was enough information to sort of give me this encouragement and hope that I was on the right track, and kind of started looking, more, and realized that we were, like Orlando was saying, that there's this crossing of research, and what we're looking at has a connection. And then, of course, yes, every time Orlando would come by and I was working on something and trying to plow through as many objects as possible to really kind of prepare some for, for potential exhibitions and whatnot. And I would be doing examinations and talking to him, and he has much greater knowledge from the art historical perspective. I have the technical sort of understanding of the object. It was really the confluence of the two types of expertise that the narrative was coming out that I would not have been able to come up with just by myself. So it was really exciting. And of course, with the other show and tells that we were doing, I have to say that I was really impressed how when we did the a show and tell of Montones with Natalie from education, and it was with the King Juan Carlos visit, the NYU students. And we just had the objects out, and I, gave the information that I had on them. And because people were so heavily in researching, the field, they began giving the expertise and the information, and it was just like a fountain was opened up. And I realized, object-based discussion. You just put an object in the center of a table and have people who are deeply interested in this kind of research, and you have a lively narrative that is highly informative. So that was quite a discovery.
Excellent. Who's next? Alex? Alex, did you have the image of the textile? Was that you?
I think Laura might have it on her.
I have it. I'll share it.
This was another great experience. I think Noemi and Anya organized it in December with the Vilcek Artist Research Fellows. So again, bringing a different perspective, and it was fascinating to see all the different, it was like basically an array of these mantillas, like from the 18th century onward, and also the mantones de Manila, which were, spectacular. And Anya and Noemi were sort of giving us like tips on like how to date these objects, sort of like basic connoisseurship, which was really important and really interesting. And that was like one of my favorite experiences. And so just to piggyback on that, yesterday we were talking about Anya's headboard, and we realized we had a common interest because I have this like weird obsession with 18th century Catalonian headboards. So we're gonna like the dialogue continues. Like it's like this is all a work in progress, and it's just ongoing. And again, Orlando, an incredible colleague and mentor. And I mean, you can probably tell, like we've all also become friends as well as, collaborators. And it's just been a really great experience in that regard as well.
Excellent. Amanda, I think you also had an image that you wanted to share about.
Yeah, I do have an image of a Pancho Fierro painting. That is it right there. But before I kind of touch base on this really wonderful watercolor by Pancho Fierro, of course, I just kind of wanted to start off by saying that I was really surprised after learning more about all of the other fellows' research, how all of us were like really interested and focused on how aspects of Spanish and Latin American culture are influenced by the cultures of others and are kind of like have that international flair. We think about nowadays as like a globalized society, but it really has been like that for centuries, it seems, especially within when we talk about the 800 years of Islamic rule in Spain. It was really awesome to see how all of us were kind of really focused on that. Of course, like Alex with the Estrado in particular, with the Middle Eastern, direct Middle Eastern influence, Anya, the Mantones de Manila, which also were affected by that sort of international textile trade. And of course, Orlando, you used a really interesting phrase today when you were discussing the Pancho Fierro watercolors. You talked about how these images kind of were evocative of the national identity, or that he was, I guess, aiming to represent that national. I don't know if he was aiming, but let's just say his paintings represented that national identity of Peru. And what's interesting to me in terms of my research of the Middle Eastern influences of food, when we talk about national identity, how even kind of sneakily, the Middle East and the Arabs and the Berbers are representative or part of that national identity. So here in this watercolor, and I'm sure Orlando could talk about it better, but what interests me is this vendor, this man selling the turrón, which of course is a very popular confection in Spain and Latin America. I think there are many different versions. Each country might have a very or slightly different version of the turrón, but the key ingredient are those almonds, the almonds and the sugar, which were of course introduced into Spain during the period of Islamic rule. So yeah, if we're talking about national identity and scenes of everyday life in Lima and Peru, yeah, I mean, those influences are there. Those Middle Eastern influences are there, even in something as simple as a turrón.
Amanda, we still have a lot to talk about later.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we never got a chance. I mean, one of the things I wish we had more time for was for me to sit directly with Orlando and maybe see some. I never got a chance to see any of the work.
We'll make it happen.
But,
We'll make it happen.
For sure.
It's funny that you say this because it's, I've seen this image before, but I never realized that that's turrón that the man's carrying on his head. And that's a lot of turrón that he has there. That's amazing.
Yeah, fabulous.
Excellent. Okay. I'm gonna have one question that I think, I've been at the Museum Hispanic Society for a very long time. And I know there are, we have some funny moments at the museum. Everyone thinks that working at a museum is so serious, but share with me a fun moment you had. We are academics, but we can be fun. And I know that you've had kind of some fun moments or a funny story. Anything you want to share that you don't have to, but
I will start.
Go for it, Orlando.
Well, my anecdote is with Marcus Burke, also my mentor, my dissertation reader, my professor, and now my friend. And we were in the elevator of the Hispanic Society, which is a 100-year plus elevator that moves with all the levers and the gate that you have to pull in and all that. And, it has been a while since I got into that elevator again. And it shakes a little bit when it starts and when it stops. It goes like, and then he was like, the first time is scary. The second time is annoying. And the third time is a bore. You'll get used to it. So that's one of the anecdotes that I will treasure with that elevator and with him, because it's just part of the Hispanic Society.
Well, I'm glad you arrived on your journey in the elevator. Who else?
Sounds like my worst nightmare. I never had the pleasure of riding in that elevator. But I also have a story with Dr. Burke. I guess, and unlike you all, I didn't really have the pleasure of interacting with him so much. I was typically tucked away in the stacks of the library, quietly researching with my head down. But he, every now and then he walked through, and there was one particular time that was a little bit silly, on the sillier side. he was going back and forth. Dr. Burke was going back and forth. I don't know the reason why. He must have been preparing for something, maybe taking stuff out of storage. But at one point, he comes through the library, the rare books library, with a display full of beautiful jewelry, very fancy jewelry. And I guess saw Vanessa and my supervisor and I standing there and took advantage of us sitting, gave us the opportunity basically to look at the jewelry. But he didn't really say, hey, do you want to see this jewelry right away? The first thing he said was bling, bling. And Margaret, you talk about academics, right? And he's like the most academic person you could think of. And then the thing you'd least expect of somebody that academic is the phrase bling, bling. But it also makes a lot of sense. If you know Dr. Burke, I guess it makes a lot of sense.
That's great. Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that Dr. Burke is like a national treasure. And mine is actually sort of related to that. So the elevator that Orlando was talking about was broken. And Dr. Burke and I were on our way to corral some ceramics up in the ceramics gallery, formerly the donor room, for the watercolor show. And I think we were going to go meet Margaret sort of to get everything together. And you know, of course, since we were with Dr. Burke, this was an adventure. So he showed me this like creepy attic thing that was like right next to that area. And we were sort of like with the iPhone flashlight, like he was just like telling me about the history of the building. And it was really cool. And then we met Margaret and she's like, oh, he didn't tell you about the snake? So apparently in the 1930s, there was like, I guess, a bad storm or something, and a river snake crashed through the skylight of this room, the attic, basically. And the women, it was largely women who were working at the time, I guess, to sort of, attest to their story that they weren't making this up, thought it would be a great idea to pickle the snake in a jar of formaldehyde, just so that's like, we're not making this up. This actually happened. And I guess in the process, I mean, there's so many cool things that you find like around every corner at the Hispanic Society. It's like my friend described it as very Harry Potter-esque. Well, Margaret said that when she was working with a group of people, like sort of going through things and throwing things out, she personally witnessed the pickled snake in a jar. And I mean, it just reminds me of like, I don't know. It's just, you never know what you're going to find.
Curiosity is indeed.
It's like the kind of lore that you would never expect to be real, but it is indeed real.
Is it still there? I mean, I think that's the most important question. Do we still have the snake?
We keep the secrets in a special place. Okay, Anya.
Well, I don't have the Marcus story, although we did have some very interesting moments of, looking through things. But, since Mantones de Manila were my object of research, when I first came, I believe there were 5 or 6 that were cataloged and we knew were at hand and they were going out. Some of them to other museums or being considered for exhibitions. So we condition reported them, examined. Then as we started digging through the collection more, we realized that some of the shawls went under different categories. So they could be like embroidered textiles, which is absolutely fine, but we had to see them to identify them as shawls. So we found more. With Patrick Lenigan's help, we photographed 16 and we're very proud of ourselves and very happy that we have now 16 beautiful mantones. It's a large collection in this museum, very important. And that was that. Until later, we started going through the TMS, looking at some textiles that, maybe could be silk embroidered, but weren't quite sure. Going up to the storage room, though, one day, I just lifted the lid of one of the boxes, not knowing what was there. I wasn't reading the labels, and what do you think I saw in the box? Another Manton de Manila. So the search goes on and it's kind of exciting. Apparently the museum has an extensive and very comprehensive collection of these shawls. So, it always pays to keep looking here.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, those are definitely some interesting stories, and I'm sure there are more. Laura, who we don't see, but is in the background, do we have any questions from our audience?
We do have 2 questions for Anya. One is, why are the Manila shawls called mantones de Manila? And if you could speak more about the hilo pegado technique.
Okay, well, all right, thank you for the questions. The Manton de Manila is called thus because it was brought on originally by the Manila Galleon, and the Tertulia that I gave, I believe it was June, goes extensively into all of that information. But it was, so the Manila shawl was called that for, for the ships that brought them originally via the Philippines, because they were coming from China via the Philippines and then into Latin America, to Mexico, Acapulco specifically, and on to, to Europe. The hilo pegado is more complicated. I really do not have at this point a lot of information. I found there's very little research really that we have unearthed so far. I found something in the bordadores mexicanos, so like the Mexican embroideries catalog, that mentions that this was a technique used in Mexico. I do not recall the name of the, the location, sort of the pueblo where it was done, but Noemi and I are aiming at really continuing this research and taking it further. We have other examples that are, so the hilo pegado, I'm sorry, I should say this, it's basically, it's not an embroidery, it's not a textile per se, but it's hilos, threads, silk thread that is attached with wax to a wooden board. And so ours is an image of the Virgin Mary with a lot of decorations and, sort of little stones like semi-precious or, gilded thread, etc. on it. So that's really what it is, but it's the only example like this that we have found as references, whatever extant examples exist. A lot of them are attached with glue, but ours has the wax. So we're still looking.
I would like to add to that the Manila Galleon was also known as the Nao de China. So it was just a name that clicked on people, and people started calling them Mantones de Manila. But also with the hilo pegado, which were some discussions that we were having amongst also the fellows, is that the technique is very similar to the technique of feather work, that they had a board, whether it was cardboard or a very thin wooden plank that was used with a glue. Well, in the case of feather work, was used with a glue that came with an orchid, and it's an Aztec technique. So now we have at least a way maybe to compare the technique that they used to stick the thread, and if it's similar, if it's something another starchy material that they use to glue as they used to in the feathers, in the glue to glue the threads, and see the similarities, because the technique is similar in the sense that they look like mosaics made of feathers and made of thread. So we see a similarity there, and it's a route to explore for sure.
We can do some of the testing here in-house for that, actually, so we can definitely continue.
Yeah, but
That's very cool. Do you have any questions of one another? I mean, I know we get to see each other, but maybe we don't know.
With Amanda, we definitely have some time to sit together and go over the confections and the things that were sold in Lima that probably had that connection with the Moorish world.
Definitely. I mean, in that regard, I have a lot of questions for Orlando, but I probably in a conversation to be continued. Because I would really like to take a look at some of Pancho Fierro's watercolors.
Absolutely. We'll keep on talking about that.
Definitely.
Well, I'll have the same request for the Mantones de Manila, because I know I saw in your presentation that there were quite a few of his drawings that included the Mantones. So
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, I want to really thank each one of you for this wonderful discussion this evening, not to mention all your hard work this past year, which has really been a tremendous benefit to the Hispanic Society and all of us who've had the opportunity to work with you. On a personal note, I want to say that it's been such a pleasure to work with all of you, and I really, really, really look forward to keeping in touch and continue the conversation. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Those of you who are watching this evening, again, I want to remind you that our fellows each presented a Tertulia. So if you go to our YouTube channel, you just have to search Hispanic Society Tertulia, and you will find their individual Tertulias for additional information on the research that they've been doing. I don't normally enjoy repeating myself, but in this case, I really want to extend once again our deepest appreciation. And I think all of the fellows here join me in thanking the Rockefeller Brother Fund, the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute, and Hubert and Muriel Goldschmidt for their support of this really, really successful curatorial and conservation research fellowship program. We are really excited to be able to continue the program, so stay tuned. We are starting to collect applications, and for additional information, please email education@Hispanic Society. Our next Tertulia will be on Tuesday, September 6th with Curator Emeritus, Marcus Burke, who we've heard a lot about, with artist Timothy Clark, whose work is featured on our current exhibition, American Travelers, a watercolor journey through Spain, Portugal, and Mexico. And if you haven't seen the exhibition yet, there's still time. The exhibit is open Thursday through Sunday from 12 to 6 through October 16th. So with that, I wish you all a lovely evening. Hasta pronto. Good night.